Hey everybody, this is Salar, and today in this tutorial we are going to program a dice roll application using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Before we go further and talk more about it, so let me show you the final version of this application and some important features. So that should be the final version, and using this roll button we are going to roll two dice simultaneously. So let me show you the execution. Let's roll. So that was our first roll, and here you can see the sum of dices as well. For dices, I'll be using dice images, and we also put some animation, rotating and fade out animation. As you can see, our dice rotates and then fades out. Another important feature of this application is you won't be able to throw another dice as long as animation goes. Our roll dice button disables itself when the animation starts and enables itself back when the animation ends, right? Here you can see you won't be able to click multiple times as long as animation goes. So it's going to be fun. Follow along and learn to code this application. So here is our code editor, and to code this application you actually need some files, right? You need a HTML file, a CSS file and a JavaScript file. And in addition to these files, you need dice images. As you can see, I have all the dice faces in a folder named img. You can download dice faces from the internet, or you can also download these faces I'm using in this tutorial. I've put the link in the description. Just go to the link and download these faces. One important thing to notice here is the name of the dice faces. As you can see, all of the faces have a same string, dice, but they have their own indices or the indexes. And these indexes represent a dice face. For example, dice 1 is the face 1. So let me show you. And here you see, it's a face 1. Dice 2 is a face 2, right? So you also name your dice images like this. They must have their own unique indexes. Otherwise, JavaScript can't fetch them and use them. So that was the initial setup that you need to have. Let's now move on and set up the HTML. So let's start with an application wrapper that's gonna contain the entire application. And inside the wrapper, we need a heading. Now we need another wrapper to group dice images, button, and everything else. We can call it, let's say, dice wrapper. Inside this wrapper, we're going to first code the dice images. As we have two dice images, so we can take another wrapper to group them. Let's call it dices, and now I'm going to put the dices, right, using the image element. Initially, we're going to put dice face 1 like this, and let's put a class dice 1, dice 2, right? Now outside of the dice container but remaining inside the dice wrapper, we're going to take a paragraph with a class like dice sum, and initially we're going to put number 2 here. So this paragraph going to have the sum of the dices, and initially we are using dice face 1 to both here, so the sum is 2, right? And right after the paragraph, we are going to code the roll button, right? And I will put this button in a container. Let's call it button container. And here is our button with the text roll and a class btn roll. So this is our entire HTML setup. That's good. Now, before we go further, one important thing here is to link CSS and JavaScript files to the HTML. So let's do that. In the head section, we're gonna link the CSS file like this, and down there, just before the body, we will link the JavaScript file. So this part is also done. Let's now very fast check the output of this HTML. So here's the output of our HTML, right? It's now time to the CSS. So let's now move on to the CSS file. Here we're going to start with the reset. It's important to reset unnecessary margin and padding. And we usually do reset in a universal selector. So have one and reset margin and padding. At the same time, we are gonna set box sizing to border box. So that was the simple reset. And right after reset, I'm gonna adjust the size of the images, dice images. As you can see, images are very big, right? So we will first adjust their sizes before we write more CSS. So in our HTML, our images have classes like dice1 and dice2. So we can select both of them using a group selector like this. And now we are going to put a size, let's say 250 pixels, right? Now let me refresh and here you see. Now our dices look fine. After that, we are going to select the body as well as application wrapper. If you remember, so we have our application, this entire application in a wrapper called app wrapper or application wrapper. So we are going to select this wrapper also. Now let's start with the body. Our application is a single page application and we wanted to take the entire viewport. So that's why we're going to give body a width 100 viewport and a height that should also be 100 viewport height. So the size of the body is now the size of the viewport. So after the size, I'll put background to the body. And for that, I use gradient. And I've already created a gradient that we'll be using. So let me just copy it from here and paste it to the body selector. So this is our gradient background. And to generate the gradient, I use CSS gradient.io website. So you can generate your own gradient using these controls. And when you're satisfied, you just need to copy this CSS to your CSS file. So this is our body now. Let's refresh the page in the browser and see how does it look. So let's make a refresh. And here you can see the body has got a gradient. And the size of the body is actually the size of the viewport. As you can see, there is no scroll on the page. Now, after the body, we'll focus on this application wrapper. And first, we'll give it a width like 60% of the body container. And after the width, I will also give it a gradient background. And put some padding, let's say 1 rem and border radius. So let's now find out the changes in the browser. Let's make a refresh. Now you can see the application wrapper, it has become prominent. You can see the other changes. Another thing is I want to place this entire container to the center of the page or the center of the body. And it can easily be done using the flex on the body. So we are going to display body as flex, justify content, center, and align item center. So these three properties are used to center any block inside another block. But they will only work when the parent block has defined width and height, and we already have it on our body block. So now this application wrapper gonna center itself. So let me refresh, and here you see the output. And so now we just need to put some styles on header, images, paragraph, and button. So let's target the header first and put some basic properties. So application header is styled. Now we see as I refresh the page, here you can see, right? Now we'll focus on these dice images and shift them to the center. So our dices are inside a container. As you can see, it's a dice container. So we can grab this container in the CSS, and to center the images, we can apply flex and justify content center. Now we can put some gap between the dices. So we need to select both the images, and let's say margin right 20 pixels, right? So let me show you the changes. Refresh the page, and you can see both the images are centered, and here we have a gap in between. Now we're going to style this sum paragraph. The paragraph, I think, has a class dice sum. So let's grab it and put some basic style properties. Refresh and check the result. You can see paragraph is styled. And now the last thing remaining here is the role button. So let's style it. So let's select the role button using its class btn role. And now I will put some basic properties. Right, so our role button is also styled. So let me show you the output. Let's refresh, and here you see the role button. And if I want this also center align, so I will select the button container here in the CSS like this, and I will simply apply text align center. So the text align center on the container gonna center align this role button. Have a refresh, and you can see the button is also center align. So our CSS is complete. As you can see, we have a layout. It's a very basic layout. You can definitely modify it and make changes to it. Now, before we go further and start writing the JavaScript, we need to create an animation, and that animation will be reserved. JavaScript will use it and control it. Animation is created using the CSS, but it can be controlled via the JavaScript. So let's go to the CSS file and create an animation. To create an animation, we actually use keyframes. So let's have an animation, and the name of the animation is rotate fade out. Animation starts from 0%, and at this time rotation should be 0 degree, and when the animation reaches to 100%, rotation should be 360 degree. So from 0 to 100%, our object gonna rotate from 0 to 360 degree. And at the same time, when animation reaches 100%, we are gonna disappear the object. And for that, we can set opacity to 0. So this is our simple animation, and this is the name of the animation, right? And to apply the animation, we need a reserve selector. So let's call it animation. And this selector gonna apply the animation, rotate, fade out, and the duration of the animation is 2 seconds, right? So this one is our reserved animation selector. So to execute the animation, we just need to add this class to the element. For example, let's suppose I add this class to the dice one like this. Now the animation is applied to the dice one. So let me show you the animation. Let's refresh, and we don't see any. So there is something wrong with the code. So let's find out. Okay, this is our animation. It looks good. I think here we have a missing semicolon. The name of the animation is rotate. Okay, so here we have misspelled. It should be rotate, right? Rotate, fade out, and here we are applying rotate, fade out. I think this should work now. So let's refresh. And now you can see our animation is working, rotating 360-degree, and then fade out effect. You can see, right? So now we are sure our animation is working, so we don't need to apply this animation class to the dice one. We are gonna control the animation via the JavaScript. Now the final step is the JavaScript. We are done with the HTML and the CSS. In the JavaScript, we will start with the selections. We need these two images in the JavaScript. We need this paragraph, and we need this roll button, right? So let's move on to the JavaScript file and do the selection. All the elements we want to select have their own classes, you can see. So we can select them simply in the JavaScript using the query selector method. So all the elements we need in the JavaScript are now selected. Now, what will be the next stage? Let's try to find it out. This is our application interface, and here everything is controlled by this roll button. When this button is clicked, things happen. That means our next step is to program this roll button. This button should respond when the click is performed on it. So to register the click event on the element, we use add event listener method. It takes two arguments. The first one is the name of the event, and when the event is raised, a function is called. And that function is gonna handle the event. So now we have programmed a click on the button, and we need to check this piece of code. We can simply log something in the console. Now, when I click on the button and we get this message in the console, that means this piece of code is working. So let's make a refresh and open the console. Now make a click, and here see the message in the console, right? So now as we know, our button is responding, we need to generate random dices. Random dices means dice numbers from 1 to 6. And for that, I'll write a function that returns a random dice number whenever it is called. So the function should look like get random dice. So this function is going to return a random dice number whenever it is called. And to generate a random number between 1 to 6, we have a very famous piece of code. So let me first write it. This line of code gonna give us a random dice between 1 to 6. Like I said, it's a famous line of code to generate random dice numbers from 1 to 6. The random function in JavaScript returns a floating point number from 0 to 0.99. It never becomes 1. And when we multiply that number by 6, it would become any number between 0 to 5.99. So the lower bound is 0 and the upper bound is 5. However, the dice values goes from 1 to 6. So to get the dice value from 1 to 6, what we do, we actually pass the result to the ceil function. Ceil is a round function and it rounds up a number. That means if the number provided to the function is 0, it becomes 1, and if the provided number is 5 point something, it becomes 6. Right? So this ceil function is important. Whatever we get from here should be passed to the ceil function. So now we have a function ready to use. It gives a random dice number whenever it is called. These images that you see here, they're only for the graphics. They're only for the interface. The real dices are actually the numbers. So before we program further, I will check if this get random dice function is working or not. So we can simply call this function in the console, and I will call it 2 times like this. So let's now study the cancel and see what do we get there. So refresh the page and click the roll button. Now you can see two dices. Here you see again a pair of dice. Alright, so we are getting random dices and you can see the lower bound and the upper bound, right? So our dice function is working perfectly fine. So now as we know our function is fine and the values are good, we can simply save the values in two different variables, one for dice 1 and one for dice 2, just like this. Now right after that, when we have two dice values in two different variables, we need to pick two images corresponding to these numbers and then assign them to the image elements. So now we are going to update the graphics based on the random number. So to the dice 1, we call the property source, and now we need to build a string exactly like this, but the number should be random. And the same we need to do for the second dice. Just change the value from dice 1 to dice 2. So what we're doing here, to the source property of the image element. As you can see in the HTML, the source property is responsible for holding the image, right? So to the source property, we are assigning a dice image or dice face based on this random dice value. Now let's suppose if the random value in D1 variable is 4, then this whole string would become like dice 4.png. So that means this image is picked by the pigram and assigned to the image element. So this is how graphic is updated. Let's now refresh the page and check the output. So make a refresh and now click, and you can see, now you can see it's working and looks good. Now to put the sum of the dices to the paragraph, we can simply calculate the sum by adding dice 1 and dice 2. We have a paragraph, let's call inner text on it, and then put the sum just like this. Let's make a refresh. Now you also see the sum of the dices like this. So we are nearly done with this application. We have two dices and we have dice sum. Everything is working fine. One last thing is animation. So let me show you how to code it and control it using the JavaScript. We want our animation to execute whenever the dices are rolled. And to make it work like that, we need to add it and then remove it. Add it and then remove it. So how do we code this add and remove animation functionality? We would actually say if the animation is not there, then add it. And if the animation is there, then remove it. And here the placement of the code is also important. We are going to animate our dices as soon as the click is performed. So before anything else, here at the top, we are going to execute the animation. And we're going to simply say if the animation is not there on dice 1, right? So if the dice 1 does not contain animation, then add animation to the dice 1. The same will do for dice 2. So this piece of code simply finds out if the animation is not there, it's not added, then add it. Make a refresh and now click. As you can see, animation is working. But it won't work again when I make another rule because the class animation is already added. Let's see. Let's have another role, and now you can see no animation. So to execute the animation again and again when the click is performed, we also need to remove it when everything is done. So what we're gonna do here is down there when everything is done. So here we are gonna remove the animation, and we just need to copy this piece of code, put it here, and now we would say instead of doesn't contain, we would say if dice1 contains animation. So you're gonna call simply remove on it. So at the top, we are adding the animation, and at the bottom, we are removing the animation. But there is a slight problem with this code. There is no error, no bug, but there is still a problem. The problem is the code executes very fast. We add animation here, and within no second, we remove animation here. So this add and remove happens very fast, and as a result, you won't see animation in the browser. So let me show you. Refresh the page and now click. Right? You see there is no animation. So how we can solve this problem? The problem can be solved by introducing some delay. As you can see, the duration of our animation is 2 seconds, right? So if you put a delay like this entire piece of code executes itself after 2 seconds, then the problem is solved. And fortunately, JavaScript has a beautiful method to execute a piece of code after some delay. And that method is called set timeout. So this set timeout is actually a method that executes a piece of code after some delay. And delay is actually provided in milliseconds. So we want this piece of code to execute after 2 seconds. So here we're gonna write 2000 milliseconds. And inside these two curly braces, we're gonna put our entire code that we have down there. So let's put it here. Now this piece of code gonna wait for 2 seconds. So this should be the solution. So let's check the result in the browser, and I'm sure now we're gonna get the desired result. So let's refresh and now roll. You see the animation, and again, and here you see the animation, right? So that was as expected. Everything is fine. But more thing that can be improved here is disable the roll as long as the animation goes. Right now, I click the roll and now I can again click the roll and again click the roll, and now you can see you saw the strange behavior, right? So if you put multiple clicks under the animation time, application gonna behave differently. So to solve it, as soon as the click is performed on the button gonna disable itself. So right after the click, button is disabled, and now the animation goes, and after 2 seconds, when the animation is complete, down there we are gonna activate the button by setting the disable to false. That's it. Now our application is fully functional. So let's give it a final try in the browser. Refresh, click, you see the animation, and now I will make multiple clicks during the animation. You can see nothing happens. So my friends, that was a simple tutorial on dice simulation using the JavaScript. and I am actually doing this tutorial to help my programming students. So if you find it good, do give it a like, put comments, and don't forget to subscribe the channel. I will see you around. Thanks for watching.